Hello and welcome to the Barcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr, coming to you on a Tuesday evening. So it's a nighttime Barcast here. We're moving on to the social one. I have tried to record this episode 3 or 4 times and the recording software is not working. So if you're hearing this on audio, it means that I gave up. And we'll go back to doing we'll be doing an audio podcast. But if you see my face, know that I'm trying to keep things fresh here, pretending that I haven't read this several times already. So here's Naranjo on the social one, whose keyword is inadaptability/superiority. The character of the social one is very different from the other subtypes of type 1. This results from a characteristic identified by Oscar Ichazo, whom I learned from, as inadaptability. For a long time, I preferred to simply use the word rigidity to describe this character, referring to something resembling a school teacher mentality, as well as what Wilhelm Reich observed when speaking of an aristocratic character. However, the term rigidity describes more of a behavioral style or a specific personality trait and not exactly a need or passion. For this reason, I felt the need to formulate a neurotic need from which the rigid character could be understood. In this search, the case of a woman was particularly enlightening. In addition to being intellectual and cultured, she was part of a university philosophy department, yet she spoke with a marked Midwestern American accent. It was striking that despite having lived in California for a long time, she retained the strong accent, often associated with less educated people. Being a social one could say her inadaptability was expressed through this, but how could such a behavioral trait be understood from an underlying motivation? So Naranjo is starting with the presenting behavior, which is not taking on the local accent, which I don't think is a particularly compelling example, but fine, right? So a certain rigidity or non-adapting to the situation. So what's underneath that, he asks. In this case, since people usually adapt their way of speaking to their environment, one might ask, why did she care so little to do so? It became evident to me that the answer lay in her generalized attitude of feeling correct. She acted as if the thought, my way is the right way, implied that it was others who needed to adapt. This was also evident in her making language mistakes inconsistent with her cultural level, which could easily be understood as stemming from her sense of being exemplary. However, he continues, the feeling of I am correct still does not constitute a motivation or passion. So where are we? The behavior is sort of a non-adapting, a non-conforming. Why is that? Is it underneath that is a feeling of like, well, my way is the right way? Why do you feel you're correct? What's the motivation or the passion underneath that? He says, to explain the contrast between a self-preservation one, who, as we will see, is the quintessential perfectionist due to their chronic awareness of their imperfections, driving them to perfect themselves, and a social one who already feels perfect and can therefore make grave mistakes, we must trace it back to the need for superiority. This need leads social ones to adopt a stance of being impeccable and perfect. The social one has a true passion for feeling, I am right and you are wrong. This in turn implies a certain power over others, for they can make others feel wrong. It is as if they were saying, if you're wrong, then I have more right than you to dominate the situation. This technique of dominating by making others feel wrong is a great strategy, understandable as an alternative to the dominance that the sexual one establishes through mere assertiveness in taking possession and feeling entitled. Yet, since these characters primarily feel an implicit moral superiority, it's useful to note the significant difference between morality and moralism. The immorality of the social one, seemingly so upright and honorable, lies precisely in the fact that their apparent morality is mere moralism. So that's a mouthful, but just working our way down. So this rigidity or non-adapting, underneath that a feeling, well, my way is the right way. What's underneath that? I am right and you're wrong. That's superiority. What's the need? What makes that the passion? Is that so long as I'm right and you're wrong, then I can make mistakes and they're okay, and you can make mistakes and they're not okay. that fuels my superiority, which then allows me potentially to make more mistakes. We're going to learn more about, what makes this pattern work in the Transformation of the Social One by Antonio Ferreira. So he begins with some of his experiences from early childhood, and it's a beautiful account. He says, "I'm at home, there's little light, almost twilight, much silence. My parents, especially my mother, are immersed in their tasks, and they look worried. They don't talk. Later, I'd learned that their life at the time was difficult. Both had experienced several bereavements, and a sense of precariousness prevailed. Echoes of war were still felt. They were strangers in an environment different from their own. I don't want to bother seemed to be the foundational decision. And based on this, he, his young self, learned not to ask and not to rely on others. He dulled his natural liveliness and transformed into a too quiet child, a good boy. He did not ask for anything, nor did he accept anything, shyly saying no, even when it was a small gift. He felt embarrassed when people showed concern or paid him, in his view, too much attention. He was considered a fragile, weak child. Don't get tired, don't run. Are you tired? They would say. I didn't like it." He adds that he later discovered he had a heart valve issue, and so there actually was some risk there. And from that realization of his health condition, he found courage to live fully. I organized my life around evaluations and decisions like, what you give me and do for me makes me suffer. I feel bad. It's better if I do things my way, as I like, and if it's too much for you, I'll manage on my own. I want to feel capable, I want to get tired, I want to run to risk hurting myself, I want to be on par with my peers. This is when he's around 10 years old. Nevertheless, I remained a sensitive, very emotional child who retained his emotions by repressing them. I didn't want to show them, but they devastated my chest inside. I blushed and felt ashamed, even over small things. Little by little, over time, I learned to control myself, becoming stronger, tougher. I didn't want anyone to discover what I was truly feeling. Deep down, I did not trust my parents to meet my needs. So we're going to continue on. This is a longer chapter. It's such a lovely one, but while not formally rebellious, I wanted to do things my way and tended to go against the grain, imposing my views. It wasn't against others. I simply wanted to stay true to what I believed was worthwhile and important to me. These traits developed mainly during adolescence when I began making choices that not only went beyond family expectations, but also those of the relatively large group of people I socialized with. Over time, I realized that many of my behaviors masked a profound feeling of inadequacy and a strong desire for recognition. Paradoxically, I felt ashamed and blushed when I received it. So by the end of this, we'll need to make sure we've sufficiently disambiguated this from, in particular, the self-preservation 4, because you could say the same thing of that type there. This feeling of inadequacy and a strong desire for recognition, and then not feeling almost violated or blushing when they get it. Wanted to be perceived as a small adult who didn't cause problems. I often stayed with adults instead of playing with siblings or peers, as if to say, see, they are children, but I'm already grown up and can be with you and your friends, participating in your conversations. Even if I just listen, I'm here. So that's a great early inadaptability, right? Rather than adapting to the situation with the children, he stayed in this sort of realm of adults. For a child, that might feel like the realm of gods, where everything is perfect. And you say, us adults here, gosh, those kids are playing they're so loud, aren't they? Right? So you can imagine that the little man or woman, the child who's grown up fast and prefers the realm of adults to the realm of children. Over time, my inadaptability increasingly turned into a need to differentiate myself, to be special. So again, major 4 energy here. And the 1 and the 4 have a deep connection. Of course, the 1 moves to the 4 and vice versa. It was also a way of rebelling against boring routines and an urge to escape, to breathe. So he's interviewed a bunch of people, and he says that all the people I interviewed said that from an early age they were older than their age. So it's a very important quality for the one. This growing up too fast, and needing to replace the mother in some cases, going to the hospital, caring for sick people. In general, he says the social type ones I've spoken with, although with different nuances, have similar stories not only in content, often diverse, but also in the existential decisions these stories led to. One of them, B, emphasizes his desire to maintain his own identity. If I adapt, I die, he says. It's like suffocating. The explosion is almost mandatory. It's a matter of life or death. It's important to do what I feel. I don't want to be manipulated. The consequence is not feeling at home anywhere, a feeling of not belonging. O says something similar. For him, the feeling of estrangement and non-belonging is recurring. B says he cannot be part of a group. The group can lead to error. You can hear so much fourness in these accounts of ones. Really interesting. Could be dangerous, and he does not explain why. M says she generally has very high expectations and aspirations for a kind of purity that does not belong to this world. The experience of rejecting reality as it is, to a greater or lesser extent, is a common and fundamental trait of the social one. They do not want to be entirely a part of it. At the bottom, there is a lack of trust in others that holds them back, but they also fear being unpleasant if they clearly say no. Consequently, when they do, they express themselves with often excessive vehemence and determination. So we would really have to be pointing specifically to the self-preservation 4 here if we're doing the 1-4 comparisons, because the other 4 types are going to be more openly melodramatic in ways that you won't find with the 1. And why don't ones participate in the group? There's different reasons. Here, listen to this. They stay at a certain distance and observe. They would like to join the group but do not dare to approach. They fear their presence might be bothersome and not well received. You in particular will say, there are people gathered inside, but I stay outside. I might not be well received. I feel alien to them. Don't let yourself be seen. Don't express your ideas and opinions. They might discover how uninteresting what they say and think is. Okay, let's carry on with the chapter. Parents. The feeling and consequent behaviors of inadaptability can be considered the result of the child's encounter with their environment, especially with the parents, and also of specific internal elaborations. All the interviewees speak of a father endowed with a certain fascination, intelligent and quite admired. For some, he's a good talker. He generally has a severe aspect. A look from him is enough to obtain obedience. O describes his father as strong, hardworking, responsible. He liked to joke with people. The mother is presented with more diverse images. Unlike the mother, she seems afraid of life. Unlike the father, she seems afraid of life. I'm going to breeze through some of the father-mother descriptions here. The parent that the social type 1 most evidently incorporates and identifies with is the father. From here derives a greater development of love admiration. Secondly, empathetic love is present, which generally increases with age. The least developed is erotic love. This is the 3 loves that I think is specific to Naranjo and a little bit outside the scope of our work here, but just to quickly mention it. So father love is kind of admiring love for Naranjo. Mother love is empathetic love. And erotic love is, I think, kind of the child love or the union love. And so because the 1 identifies most closely with the father, the 1 gets a more developed love admiration. And again, this just all lends itself to sort of the aristocratic, moralistic nature of the 1. He says in summary, the social type 1 convinces themselves that what their parents offer is not enough for them. They believe that their needs cannot be met. They think it is better to organize for themselves. or to organize themselves. From a very young age, they have claims to autonomy, whether obedient or rebellious. From very early on, they're a small adult. They want to do things directly, declaring it, or more subtly, pursuing their goal without making much noise. Finally, they tend to impose their own model and are unlikely to adapt to what the external world offers them. It's interesting, we'll learn more. The Naranjo begins by saying how different the social one is than the other subtypes, but so far this sounds like it's an apt description of all ones. Although the social one sounds like more likely to do it their way in a slightly more subtle approach than, let's say, the sexual one. But the little adult quality, I think, pervades across the subtypes. And this kind of fundamental belief that they look at their parents and say, I need to, somehow the burden falls on them to make things right. So let's continue. Inadaptability is structured around decisions such as, if things are this way and I don't like them, I'll do them my way. Even when I need help, it's better not to rely on others. I surely won't get what I need, and in the end, I'll have to manage on my own. I must make an effort and work hard to achieve it. I'll be strong so I can face life and overcome my limitations and incapacity. I won't let fever or illness stop me. I'll always be on my feet. I won't bother anyone, and then they'll love me. I'll strive to be deserving so that I'll be recognized and have the right to live in this world. P literally says, I care for others and don't let them care for me. I take care of everything that concerns me, especially the difficult things. Since I need things, but it's unlikely that they'll meet my needs, I'll manage on my own. I'll be strong, good, brilliant, perfect. I'll be like my father and the opposite of my mother. For others, the roles of father and mother may be reversed, but the ultimate decisions remain essentially the same. So that's they call those existential decisions, sort of the heart, it feels like, of the keyword of inadaptability / superiority. Superiority is like my needs are, I don't have needs, and when I do have needs, I'll manage because I'm on this superior ground. I think we still have a ways to go, though, before making this kind of come fully alive. Like, why does this break down for the one? I think the one is really interesting because of all the types that, all the types share this quality of not facing the existential void. But the one is the one that sort of seems to most clearly look at it and say, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make things right. They're not talking about their existential void of their being. They're talking about cleaning up the room or cleaning up the organization or cleaning up social justice issues or whatever. But I mean, it's a pretty hands-on, active, direct attempt to recover and fix. And so for that reason, I think sometimes the passion itself is a little bit less clear. Like, why does this fall apart? Or does it fall apart in the same way that other passions do? So let's keep going. Perfectionism. Inadaptability entails constant effort and dedication to doing things well, which escalates into an unattainable demand to be perfect. This leads to the belief that things must be done better and better, never being satisfied with the outcomes. This attitude produces a state of constant tension, preventing relaxation or enjoyment of achievements. One quickly moves on to the next endeavor or obligation. Those who follow this path are driven by an irrational and insane idea. Only if I'm perfect will I be loved, says B. The challenge to oneself is to make it solely through my own abilities, so others will admire me. So there's this quest for admiration, and the one being a neighbor to the feeling triad. That's the feeling triad coming in, this wish to be admired or to be loved. And of course, we all want to be loved. But the one also wants to be perfect, wants to get it right, and that's the doing triad. I spoke in another video about, for the doing triad, the concern is doing what's right. For the feeling triad, it's feeling what's true. And so the one, while the one absolutely wants to be loved and feels like they have to be perfect to earn love, they also, I think, are seeking perfection for its own sake. And it feels important. I'd love to talk to one more about that, but I don't know if the be all and end all for the one, existentially speaking, is love or perfection. Perfection might be an end unto itself. But in any case, it fails for the most part, right? So what happens? The one tries to get it perfect, but what do we know about the social one and how they're going to get it perfect? They're probably not going. So the social one, I think, is interesting because the social one seems to, rather than trying to like reform the situation, they almost retreat to their own private fortress. I'm just remembering that story of, the young kid who goes to the parents' table and hangs out with the parents, right? Rather than reform the kids' table, the social one, the superior one, retreats to a superior footing that they can once again regain perfection in. But let's keep reading. Demandingness, demanding oneself to the point of torture, with sacrifice and only using one's resources. The goal is to improve, improve, improve. I will prove to those parents, sometimes both, sometimes mainly the father or the mother, what I'm capable of. It's a kind of ransom the child demands, and the adult unconsciously continues pursuing an impossible goal of perfection. They develop a special eye for spotting flaws and blemishes. Effort and demands aim to project a good image of oneself. So we'll also need to talk about the three at some point here. I'm just going to quickly see how much we have left here. Okay. I think we should go through all of this. It's a really great chapter. The social type 1, like the other subtypes, bases its defensive systems primarily on reactive formation. Repression of experiences is not enough. They must be transformed. They seek improvement, believing that their thoughts or feelings lack sufficient value or won't be well received. Thus, they transform them into something else. The social subtype in particular rarely expresses anger and replaces it more with socially acceptable forms. Their attitudes and expressions tend towards seriousness and restraint, displaying controlled coolness, a subtle smile, and a kind of aristocratic superiority that can escalate to indignation. They appear calm and composed. In activities generating high tension, anger transforms into a diffuse demand, leading to an obsessive desire to improve and correct, primarily others, but also themselves. Anger hides, remaining beneath the surface, and is converted into a drive to improve, a demand, and a control of oneself and others. Thus, the objective becomes seen as more noble, to do things better, to be better. For P, the outcome of all this is disastrous. Despite not being programmed to have children, she has one through artificial insemination. She is both mother and father to the child, refusing to see the biological father as sufficiently capable. Wow. I raised him the way I was raised. Her father wanted her to be perfect. Now she wants her son to be perfect. No crying, no laughing, no fear allowed. The result is that the child inflicts small cuts on himself and suffers. He cannot tolerate all the presence and perfection. It's kind of a challenging account. So before we go on, I think we can maybe try to synthesize a little bit of the passion at this point, and really kind of get into this idea of superiority and superior ground. This is a type who doesn't display anger, so they hide their anger. And they're not direct reformers in the way the sexual one is going to be a direct reformer, trying to change the environment, trying to change the context, trying to push the river. Instead, the social one seems to sort of always have this superiority field that they can move back to. And so, I'm married to someone who's a social one, has a strong social one component, maybe is a two. But, it can be so important for her to clean her area. Like, and I don't have that instinct that strongly, but I think about, like, I can't necessarily change the world, but I can change my space. And as long as I can change my immediate space, then I can return to my superiority, which is safe. And it might not literally be cleaning up the area. It might be even retreating inside to one's own kind of moral high ground. So why does that not work? Well, I think it's this rigidity, because there's not really a way. You can't actually separate yourself from your environment. So the superiority is a hallucination. It's a similar move to the 5. I mean, there's so many different types at work here, but when we've talked about a refuge with the 5 doesn't want to need anything, just like the 1. And so the 5 sort of creates this fortress of solitude around themselves, but of course they eventually do need things, right? And so the superior one, the social one, has some similarities going on, but their refuge, rather than being like a cave for the 5, which is avoiding contact, this kind of refuge is it's not an effective, like the 5s actually have a good refuge. I mean, the 5s will really, lock themselves in the basement and put on headphones. The 1's refuge is just in a kind of a weakly held idea of superiority. And so I think that's where the rigidity comes in, is like this, as I described, this constant tension. So much work has to be done to either distance oneself from what's wrong out there, or to somehow dress up. There's sort of, like the 4, there's this constant comparison that has to be taking place. And I think the nature of that is to go rigid. And the rigidity is in part aversion. It's like, I don't belong to, it's a renunciation of the external world to some extent. But then it's also a renunciation of one's internal needs. So there's a lot of pushing away that the social one is doing to maintain their superiority. But when they have their superiority, that's how they get things done in the world, because that's literally their moral high ground. So I think the moral high ground is actually a really great, I think this is the essence of the passion here. Retaining the moral high ground is incredibly exhausting, but from the moral high ground, one gets what one wants. So that's, I guess it wasn't that complicated. Let's carry on with other characteristics. The social type is the most intellectual of the 3 ones, is often a great thinker. They hide their anger with imperturbability. He adds, aristocratic, elegant, circumspect, underneath lies the fire. Many dedicate themselves to volunteering and helping others. Right, and so why help others and volunteering? For moral superiority. That's their passion. So there might be all sorts of reasons why people are helping others, but for the social subtype, it's so that they can regain the moral high ground from which they can get what they want. They can also make mistakes because they still have the moral high ground. They can criticize others and dominate them. And again, I surely you're not just joining us, but if you are, this is like the hardcore Enneagram. So we're not talking about the gifts of ones, nor are we acknowledging that like there are all sorts of reasons why you might become a humanitarian, and at the end of the day, if you are a humanitarian, that's a wonderful thing to be. Okay, transformation. Yeah, so here comes serenity, which is the classic virtue or conversion moment for the one. They accept that they can make mistakes, something that was previously unthinkable. They allow more room for play and permit themselves to enjoy it more often. They no longer feel the fear or sense of danger they used to when others saw things differently than they did. Yeah, that's a big one. There's greater surrender even when they don't fully understand the knowledge or perspective of the person they're surrendering to. Um, Cultivating erotic pleasure is a theme throughout this, wanting to do that. Spiritual practice. Stopping asking the question, what should I do? More spontaneity. And he concludes, as for my own process of transformation, it occurred gradually and under various circumstances. Theater helped me. He says, I believe that everything I've shared so far in these lines constitutes a set of important factors that characterize the path of transformation for the social one. Confronting their coldness and rigidity requires loving acceptance and appreciation of their abilities, as they often do not recognize their own worth. They need to temper their harsh self-criticism and negative judgment, which they project onto the world. Yeah, I mean, the one's relationship toward their own worth is a really interesting subject, because sometimes you'll hear ones are the ones with the harshest inner critic, and I think that's true, but that's not completely to say that all ones think that they're bad. If, as the social one here, is seeking perfection, I think it's not necessarily low self-worth. It's just no shortage of criticism, no shortage of valid criticism. When you're seeking perfection, there's always some criticism. And so, like the four, the one is really oriented toward lack. What's missing? What's wrong here? But where the four uses that to prove their own worthlessness or brokenness or whatever, the one is using it to prove that they're not perfect, and essentially that they lack the moral high ground that they require to operate in the world. They need to temper their harsh self-criticism and negative judgment, which they project onto the world. Another key aspect is a spiritual experience, initially faint, but which gradually became very significant. Tibetan Buddhism became important to him, as did the Catholic tradition. I think we can call it there. Let's see, anything else? My mantra now is let what wants to come, come. Feel less controlled, more alive. he got his heart fixed, heart valve. And, it says that, he caught himself getting out of bed sooner than he was supposed to, etc., taking risks, this matter of recklessness or madness. So for him personally, this he sort of moves into this brave little man part. Now, what is the relationship between that and superiority? Let's be careful. He's showing that he doesn't have needs, that he doesn't need anybody. Why is that important? Because it gives him superiority. And it's a rehashing of the original wound for the one in general. Let's start with by saying that as a young child, they somehow see, probably through their own needs of needing something, and see that the parents aren't going to give it, and so they make a decision in that moment, which is that then I will just be someone who doesn't have needs. And what ties this to perfectionism is somehow tied up with this is the one has this memory of perfection, and so feels the loss of that perfection very painfully. And I think that's what's still confusing to me about the one. So there's sort of these two wounds. There's the wound where things aren't right, and then there's the wound of taking on the burden to make them right. I think it's almost like if we're trying to get the one's wound named accurately, I don't think their original moment is so much that they needed something, but they could see that things weren't right and they were the ones who would have to fix it. And that might be their needs. They might recognize my needs aren't getting met. There's something that's not right about this and I'm going to have to fix it. But it might be something else too. It might be that they, like, again, going back to the childhood wounds, they were maybe exposed to hospitalizations a lot, or one girl replaced her mother and was going with her dad to these events. So here I'm just imagining this little girl, walking, being surrounded by adults. Like, there's something she isn't getting her needs met, and that's not right. And it's almost like that's not right wins out at the core of the one. So they are tied together, but I think that the core energy of the one is not so much about getting the love as it is about, I wish things were just right and I didn't have to be the one doing it. I feel like the one is so exhausted by the effort of trying to make things right when they used to be perfect and I didn't have to do anything. So I think that's the heart of the passion there. What the superior one does is avoids all of that feeling by saying that my little slice here is perfect. I'm superior. And of course I'm not, and so I'm always demanding myself to make it perfect and better, but that's from a place of actually quite a high self-regard. So they really do feel superior. I think in some ways, this isn't a fake presentation, but they still feel completely inferior to their own pure ideal. Okay, that was a long one, but enjoyed getting into it. It's almost 10 p.m.